So many brands here in the US think that getting into Whole Foods or Sprouts or, whatever it is instant success. And like that means they've made it with their business. And the reality is that grocery is a high risk, high cost game that can sink a business if you're not ready.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Mapper Forward's workshop. It's time to become a coffee consultant. Learn how to diversify your revenue streams and create freedom from your day job while saying goodbye to that alarm clock forever by becoming a consultant within the coffee industry or directly to consumers who have shifted towards home brewing and home roasting. Protect your income from challenging times in the coffee value chain by taking this course today. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 4 of a great 5-part series with Alli from Ready Retail. And we're talking about grocery and specifically coffee in grocery. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about why grocery might not be for you. So there are a lot of people who think, Alli, that grocery is going to save a lot of what they do. It's going to be the answer to everything. And what people don't seem to understand a lot of the time, and it goes to a much, much deeper problem in our industry, which is most people don't know how to read a P&L. They don't know how to price out their products properly. They don't understand how to read their financial statements, so they don't understand what their assets are and their liabilities are, nor do they understand how to read cash flow statements. And that's no judgment on our industry. Well, not 100%, but it kind of is. All I'm saying is people are so sick of me hearing me say, learn how to read a fucking profit and loss statement, people. I love everyone in this industry. We're in a very precarious situation in 2025. And we are in this precarious situation because people haven't learned how to read this stuff and understand this stuff. And the barrier to entry is so low into our industry that historically we have sort of faked it till we made it.
100%. 100%, Lee. And what we say in Retail Ready is brands come in and, they're a couple of years in business and they realize that they don't have a business. They just have a really expensive hobby.
Word. Like, this is the big thing. And they're barely surviving. They're paying themselves less than minimum wage. They're living on brown rice. And they believe to the bullshit of, all of these influencers that really aren't building anything for themselves, that are selling these ebooks, that are telling them, who have no actual legitimate experience, who are convincing them that you just have to will it into existence. You have to hustle. If they will come. That is the biggest load of horse shit I have ever heard.
100%. And Lee, listen, so our Retail Ready program, we've got 2 different tiers in it, $1,800 or $3,000. And I always say, if you come into Retail Ready and you spend $1,800 US and you decide that retail is not the right path for your brand, I have just saved you $250,000 this year.
Yeah, 100%. Seriously. And some courses you should do to help you make decisions, not to help you make mistakes. So
absolutely. Yeah. And the reality check here, right? So if we're thinking about what was your original question? Like why it might not work for some brands?
Yeah.
Right?
Why it might not work.
I think about this segment, Lee, as being the reality check for brands who are chasing grocery too soon or don't have the resources to sustain retail success. And the goal here, I want to be clear, it's not to discourage listeners from going into retail. It is to help listeners self-assess whether or not they're actually ready for grocery or if they need to pause and refine their strategy first. And getting into grocery is not the right move for every coffee brand or every brand, period, right? And that is totally, totally okay, right? So many brands here in the US think that getting into Whole Foods or Sprouts or, whatever it is instant success. And like that means they've made it with their business. And the reality is that grocery is a high risk, high cost game that can sink a business if you're not ready.
That's going to be sobering for so many people to hear. And
I know
there's a lot of people out there that are really feeling what you're saying because they have done it and it sank their business, or it almost tanked their business. They got into huge amounts of debt by, maxing out every credit card they had just to be able to get into grocery, and didn't know if it was going to work for them or not. So even the brands that it did work for, there are people listening that are saying, it was just by sheer luck that we managed to survive.
Right time, right place. Yeah. Something worked out for us, like the stars aligned.
Right.
Or maybe like we had a buyer who really advocated for us. This exists, right? But like we had a buyer who really advocated for us. We didn't have to pay to play like Alli and Lee were talking about. Like our reality was different. And so again, I want to be clear here that, this is one version of the story. And there are other versions too. I have built my livelihood around retail. I love retail. I love wholesale. Here I am talking about all the negatives of it. But I just want brands to be fully aware of what happens on the retail side of things so that you can make an empowered choice for you. Is it a yes? Is it a no? Is it maybe later? Like, it doesn't matter. I don't actually care as long as you're making a choice that's good for you.
And with the current climate that we're in, what we're going to see is a lot of consolidation happen in the coffee industry, which means that bigger fish are going to be consuming the little fish. And because they have the capital to be able to pay to play on shelves, what we're going to see is there's going to be a new entry into the market from people who are leaving corporate and they're saying, you know what? Fuck this corporate life. I want to do something that's easy. I'm going to go into the coffee industry.
Yeah, we saw this a lot in 2020 here in the US. I'll tell you, we had an explosion of folks joining us in Retail Ready, particularly from tech industry, who were like, oh my goodness, like suddenly my 9 to 5 is not so stable.
Yeah.
Like I'm working for the man.
Yeah.
I might as well try my own thing. And I think, Lee, you touched on it, right? There's so many folks out there being like, you can do it, manifest your business, like
toxic positivity bullshit. I'm not here for it at all.
And I believe that there is room for emerging brands in the marketplace.
100%.
I believe that it is vital that we have small businesses. I think that we are heading in a direction of consolidation that makes me really nervous. Like we need brands to keep showing up and we need to find a way to help them be sustainable. But the reality is that this like big grocery landscape is not set up for small brands, right?
No.
So like some of the ways, like, we're like, will it not work for you? My brain goes towards the cash flow, right?
Yeah.
We touched on this earlier, but do you have the cash to support grocery, right? Like that, it's just so expensive. Slotting fees can be thousands of dollars per SKU per retailer. You mentioned that with your RTD, right, Lee?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Massive amounts.
Gosh, I mean, distributors can take 25 to 30% of your wholesale price, like right off the gate. You need promotions and trade spend, demos required to hit your target velocities. And then thinking about that cash flow needed, right? Needing capital for 6 to 12 months of retail support before you are starting to see a profit there, right? Like in grocery, we're usually looking at net 90 payment terms. So you might be sending, let's say you're like cranking, you send a pallet of your beans to Costco. They're paying you 90 days later. And again, if you've got that set up where maybe you're doing guaranteed sales for them, there's the broker fees, there's maybe like storage fees. They're like a sneaky fee where they're charging you to like keep your pallet in backstock. All of a sudden, you send $30K worth of beans and you're getting an invoice for $10,000 or you're getting paid for $10,000, excuse me, like
Oh, wow.
where'd all the cash go, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it might not work for you if you don't have a lot of cash. I'll say that.
Well,
Goodness.
and one of the things that's really interesting right now is I want to talk to you about like how long they lock in prices for. Because what we're seeing in coffee right now is that coffee is priced, especially if we're talking about commercial coffee, it's priced on a
Yeah.
futures market.
Right.
And I don't know if you know, but the price has shot up
Oh,
crazy,
yes, I know.
crazy.
Our
Crazy.
coffee roasters are chocolatiers in retail already.
Yeah.
I mean, goodness. Yeah, we're hearing it for
Wait
sure.
for sugar. Sugar's about to come. I
Oh,
expect soy to do
yes.
the same
Yeah,
thing.
we've got a couple date sugar
Yeah.
clients and they're like, all right.
Yeah, here we go.
Here we go.
So what happens, I had a guest on the podcast who supplies Costco, and it's one of those things where I think of like, okay, so how do they approach a conversation with Costco right now when the price of the coffee that Costco's buying has just now 2x'd or almost 3x'd. So what happens in a situation like that?
Yeah. So it depends on the retailers. Some retailers want you to lock in pricing for a specific amount of time where they're like, we're going to sell you this at this price for the next 6 months, like whatever it is. Other retailers don't have any sort of agreement on that. And you as the brand can increase prices whenever you need to. However, the risk there is knowing that every time you do a price increase, that retailer needs to make a decision. They have to decide if they're just going to eat that margin and be like, okay, like it's not worth it for us to like go into our point of sale, change on the back end, reprint our price tags, like re-sticker the bags, like all of that sort of stuff. So, and they'll do that for a little bit. Like, we would have producers increase their price and I would just make less margin as the retailer. But at some point, that's not sustainable for the retailer either. So then they respond by changing the prices on their shelf. And that's fine, right? Like I work with so many students in retail already who are nervous to have those conversations with retailers. They're like, oh goodness, like I don't want to tell them that I have to raise my prices. And I'm like, dude, you haven't raised your prices in 2 years. Buyers get price increase notifications every single week from brands. It's just a part of their job. Like they just know it's one aspect of their job. So if your listeners are here and they're like, oh God, like I am in retail and I do need to raise my prices. Yeah, that's fine. Just do it. Like the buyer is used to those conversations. And know that you ideally are not doing it more than like twice a year max. Like you can't, I mean, you could, but you're going to get discontinued. I was going to say, you can't be like changing your price every month. Like it just doesn't work for that retailer.
What about changing your SKUs?
Yeah. Okay. Great question, Lee. So this, again, it is so dependent on how large of a retailer we're working with. Those larger retailers want consistency with your SKUs, right? And so when we were thinking about like, why is it not going to work for me? One of the things I wanted to bring up was demand planning, right? And thinking about your seasonal availability. Right. And like literally, like, do you have production capacity to fulfill larger orders? And do you have something like what are the SKUs that you are roasting that have consistency year round? And what are you changing seasonally? Some stores, like when I was at Buy Right, I was down with seasonal changes. And I was like, okay, cool. Like how wonderful is it that we now have Brazilian coffee for these 2 months? Like how wonderful is it that these, Mexican beans are hitting our shelves? And I always had a couple facings where I would seasonally rotate products. Okay. And then I'll just say, as a buyer perspective, it was annoying. It was truly annoying, but we did it because
you're a sweetheart. That's why.
Yeah, like our market really
appreciated it.
Our consumers wanted it. Like we did enough we had a savvy enough shopper to understand that and stuff.
Mm.
But it had to also be balanced by having SKUs that were year round. And
Right.
some roasters achieved that by having blends
Mm-hmm.
where they were just like, okay, this is our, Blue Boon blend. I'm thinking about Sight Glass.
Uh-huh.
They have that all year round. Yes, the
Yeah.
beans are
Might
different,
change,
but like it might
but the
change, but like
SKU's the
we have
same.
that, the SKU's the same, right? And so it's finding that balance or being like, okay, we can almost always like have a Guatemalan on the shelf.
Mm.
It's going to change,
Mm-hmm.
but we're always going to have like one SKU of Guatemalan, single
Mm-hmm.
origin Guatemalan. Great.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short there, buyers prefer convenience and predictability.
Mm-hmm.
And so when your availability is changing quite often,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it harder for the buyer to manage. So thinking
nice.
about, right, when we thought about like, okay, say you've got 8 SKUs, what are the 3 that are most consistent?
Mm-hmm.
And how can you lead with those rather than saying like, yeah, every 8 weeks we're changing up our SKUs. And you're going to have to change in the back end of your system and do the new price tags and shelf talkers and staff education and all of that.
I can't
I'm
imagine...
tired just thinking about it.
Yeah, as am I. Well, and this leads me to this idea of like, I can't imagine something quite as humiliating for a brand to say, make the announcement, we're going to be in Target. And, they make a big fanfare of it. And, thanks to everyone for helping us to get into Target. And then the product doesn't move.
Yeah.
And you don't have your supply chain strategy secured,
right,
that ensures that there is enough coffee to keep it on the shelf.
Well, Lee, I mean, we see this, right? Where it's like, okay, you launch into Target, sales go really well, right? It's not a sales problem.
Yeah.
But then you're like, oh shit, I can't fulfill, right? There was crop failure here. Our beans are stuck in customs over here. Like we literally cannot fulfill this order.
Yeah.
And so then Target has a hole in their shelf, like literally, like no, right?
An empty shelf.
We talked about that like every shelf placement has to be making money for the retailer. So they're not just going to sit around and wait for you to fulfill a purchase order 6 weeks later. They're going to replace that slot with somebody else's beans. Yeah. And so, Lee, you use the word humiliating, I think, also say just heartbreaking. Yeah. Right. If it doesn't work. And I'll also say that like people also are paying less attention to you than you think they are, right? So like you're like, lunch sale, and like it feels like a big deal for the brand, and also like no one really notices, especially if you were having slow sales there, then like no one really notices that you aren't there anymore. But yeah, I get how it can feel like such a deal for the brand to not succeed in their dream accounts. It's heartbreaking.
Oh, look, I remember what it was like to lose wholesale accounts and what that felt like. It felt like such a failure. And when you come to realize like, hey, I'm of the deep belief that when you're building a brand, the first question you need to be asking is, what problem does this solve for my customer? And if you can clearly answer that question, everything is easier after that. Not easy, easier after that.
So, Lee, if we look at it from the perspective of the wholesale buyer being the customer in this case, right? The key thing here is in those conversations with the buyer, those initial conversations, is asking the like supercharged question of what does success look like on your shelves? And literally have that buyer say like, okay, coffee roaster, success on my shelves would be moving 6 bags per SKU per store per week. And you're like, okay, awesome. I've got my benchmarks. And then we know, right? Then it's not a surprise if you're discontinued, if you're only selling 1 SKU per, bag per store.
There's a reason, folks, why artists like Beyonce and Kelly Clarkson and a whole bunch of, Meghan Trainor go to Target when their albums are released, and they send all of their minions out to Target to go and buy their albums off the shelf the day they're released.
Yeah.
It is really, those numbers get reported and it's a big deal. But second of all, it shows that the units are moving. It shows it gives the buyers a reason to get more of those product on the shelf, and they order more. Like, I always used to get told by people who were talking to me about, get into grocery, and then just get all your friends to go and buy the stock.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's great and all, but that's not a long-term strategy.
No.
At the end of the day, I mean, it's manipulation.
You need more than your friends and family buying your product.
Right. And this is one of those things where, I mean, yes, get your friends and family to buy the product. But if that's all you can do, then it's not going to work.
It's not sustainable. Lee, I know brands who will launch into a retailer and then they will go and buy the product, their own product off the retail shelf to prove that it's selling. I'm like, that is it's a really expensive sales strategy. And two, like you just said, it's a short-term strategy.
Yep.
That's not a strategy. That's like a lever that you're pulling. It's a Band-Aid fix here.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
So in the final episode of this series, folks, we're going to talk about, now that you're on the shelf, what's next? And we've talked a little bit about this, but we're going to go through some really specific ideas of what your mindset should be if you happen to get on the shelf. So join us for the final episode of this series. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward.